to the MDI BioLab for hosting our talk. David and I are pleased and honored to be part of the summer's Art and Science program. We're also glad to see a number of the artists from Art of Acadia featured in this year's show, including Scott Waltz, Ellen Church, Liddy Hubbard, Judy Taylor, Robert Polian, and Alexandra Ting. Kudos to Bonnie Gilfillan, Stephanie Matson, and Annette Carminoff for putting together another outstanding exhibition. Leave it to the Islanders' our own Nan Lincoln to sum up the show's theme with a lyric from a popular song. Reunited and it feels so good. We are also, of course, excited to be part of the Park Centennial. We thank Jack Russell, Cookie Horner, Friends of Acadia, park personnel, and everyone, all the other Centennial partners for dedicating themselves to making this year one to remember. Long live Acadia National Park. One of the ways the park is sustained is through the sales of park passes. Art of Acadia features the 2014 Acadia National Park Pass designed by contest winner Jacob Legutko, and then an 8th grader from Mount Desert Elementary School. This is his Porcupine Islands 2014. I'm going to turn it over to David.
Thank you, Carl. That was nice. Thank you all for coming. It's really, I've never been here before, so this is really a first time for me. It's really, so far what I've seen is a beautiful campus. We also would like to acknowledge the support of our families in helping us get through this project, and particularly one person who really helped with the book. He's not here, Bill Bentley. He did really all of the formatting and processing of the digital imagery, along with me looking over his shoulder. There we go. Our family connection to Mount Desert Island is through our uncle, the artist William Keenbush, who bought a summer home on Great Cranberry in 1962 and bequeathed it to us in 1980. Bill loved the island with its active social life, trips to neighboring islands, and the solitude necessary to produce work for New York exhibitions. That's the house on the right. That's a painting I did. Over the past century and a half, the spectacular beauty and rugged character of Mount Desert's mountains and rocky shores have drawn artists to this remarkable island region. Published to coincide with the 100th anniversary of the founding of Acadia National Park and the National Park Service, Art of Acadia celebrates the art inspired by this magnificent park and its surroundings. The artist Alexandra Ting produced a series of aerial view paintings of Mount Desert Island, of which she says, "Ever since I saw Leonardo's bird's eye drawings, I've been fascinated by aerial views. From a high vantage point, the shapes of land and cities and rivers and coastlines and the connections between them are revealed. We are grateful to the MDI BioLab for borrowing this painting, Jet Streams, for the current exhibition, A Fresh Field of Life, Artists, Naturalists, and the Vision for Acadia." It's right over there. And the artist is here tonight, which is just a double delight. The earliest artifacts created on Mount Desert Island were utilitarian and decorative craft objects created by Native Americans for their own use. This pair of moccasins was included in an exhibition at the Maine State Museum in 2009 titled Uncommon Threads. The Wabanaki peoples made canoes, wigwams, weapons, and clothing using animal hides, bones, wood, and stone. Later, with the introduction of European fabrics and other trade goods, and with a gradual shift to a currency-based economy and commerce with the newcomers, these gifted artisans sold ash and birch bark baskets, embroidered quill work, and beaded ornaments, decorative moccasins, blankets, and formal ceremonial wear while at their seasonal encampments on Mount Desert Island. Both of these are from the Maine State Museum, and the one on the right is a seat back in a canoe, attributed to John Snow. In the MDI region, this contemporary mapping device, known by the acronym LIDAR, has been used by scientists to forecast future sea level rise through mapping coastal zones and estuaries with marshes. Here at sunset, the laser, scanner, and GPS receiver from high up gives us a striking digital elevation model of the mountain range as dominant feature. This clarity and simplicity, suggested a graphic overlay to present the historical name changes that George Dorr and others made. German artist and draftsman Franz Grader accompanied geologist Charles T. Jackson in exploring and surveying the northeastern boundary areas of Maine in 1836, including, as Jackson said, a great extent of seacoast between Thomaston and Eastport. Jackson stated that Grader drew many beautiful sketches of geological and woodland scenery of the state. Note that Jackson states on page 29 of the report that Nova Scotia was called Acadia by the French before 1775. This is plate 21 from Jackson's Atlas of Plates illustrating the geology of the state of Maine, and it's from the Maine State Library. Thomas Cole, the founder of the Hudson River School, wrote on this drawing, you can sort of see it over on the right. This is what he said. "This is a very grand scene. The craggy mountain, today's beehive, the dark pond of dark brown water, the golden sea sand of the beach, and the light green with its surf, all together with woods of varied color, make a magnificent effect such as is seldom seen created in the sun." This note may well have prompted his pupil Frederick Church to follow in his footsteps. In his essay on American scenery, written in 1836, Cole's conclusion in the part titled "The Destruction of Beautiful Landscapes" foreshadows the importance of the over-harvesting of trees as a factor in early conservation efforts on Mount Desert Island. Thomas Cole died in 1848, and 2 years later, Frederick Church would first visit Mount Desert Island and begin a series of trips to both the MDI and Katahdin regions. His masterpiece, of Little Long Pond and Jordan Cliffs, includes lands of over 1,000 acres that have recently been given to the Land and Garden Preserve of Mount Desert Island by philanthropist David Rockefeller Sr. Harrison Bird Brown at upper left and Sanford Gifford at bottom right were among the legions of artists that traveled to Mount Desert Island in the years before, during, and after the Civil War. Many artists desired new scenic views east of the White Mountains of New Hampshire in Maine to fill out their portfolios for exhibitions back home and at the academies. The island provided a unique combination of ocean, mountains, and islands, especially when viewed from a height. The popularity of Thomas Doughty's first painting of Desert Rock Lighthouse in 1838 brought much attention, both in art and literature, to this lonely outpost 18 miles offshore. Engravings and painted variations and tales of shipwreck and rescue at the rock led to a highly romanticized lithograph from the firm of Currier and Ives. Today, Mount Desert Rock serves as the Marine Research Station for College of the Atlantic. These are two engravings by Harry Finn. In the mid to late 19th century, guidebooks, souvenir albums, fictionalized travel narratives, romantic tales, and satire in articles and newspapers all contained illustrations that provided visual flavor and setting to the town's buildings and activities on Mount Desert Island. These two illustrations of his engravings from the voluminous Picturesque America, published in 1872, feature some of the unusual rock formations along the coast. On the left is Otter Cliffs, which they had called Castle Head because of its resemblance to a fort with buttresses and battlements. And the ovens on the right, which they called the Via Mala, after a place in Europe. It was difficult to get to. Edward Allen was one of a handful of stereo view photographers working on Mount Desert Island after the Civil War. Hidden from view in this photo are the photographer Allen with his twin-lensed camera mounted on a tripod, and the twin lens, they're about 2 inches apart, which is the distance from one eye to the next. And then nearby is an assistant with a small portable darkroom, also on a tripod, to develop the small glass wet plates after a 20-second exposure. Like today's TV, viewing the three-dimensional effects of magnification and depth perception and collecting these cards were fashionable activities, leading to increased visibility for the island and associated tourism. The backlists, which you see when they're on the right, were like field guides for the most popular subjects on MDI. So if you collected, you really did want to go and try to see the places they're talking about, the buildings and locations. On the left, Xanthus Smith, Philadelphia artist Xanthus Smith's classic painting of the brand new Claremont Hotel he loved and stayed at for 10 years in the summers, reflects the new prosperity and leisure activities of the Gilded Age on the quieter side of the island. And on the right, some 19th century guests staying at the Soames house weren't above doodling in the house register. Quantities of the popular popovers were consumed with abandon, prompting the creation of a popover cartoon monster bent on retaliation. Among the first conservationists to appreciate the beauty of the island, and later on to recognize the need to protect it, were the landscape architect Charles Eliot and his father, Charles William Eliot, the president of Harvard University. On summer excursions, starting in 1871, the Eliot family and their guests camped in tents on Calf Island in Frenchman Bay, sailed the surrounding waters, and visited nearby Bar Harbor. Both father and son would, as Henry James wrote, form a lifelong attachment to Mount Desert and the islet-strewn waters whence seafarers looked landward to the shadowy shoulders of green Cadillac Mountain, or seaward upon the limitless Atlantic. At 21, the young Eliot returned to Mount Desert Island on his father's yacht with fellow students from Harvard as the captain of the newly formed Champlain Society named for the French explorer. The group of men spent 8 summers studying the region's flora and fauna, as well as its geology, meteorology, and marine invertebrates, carrying out field research and making reports on their findings. They also came up with a song, the chorus of which went, "Then hail to the Champlain Society, devoted to Fairmount Desert." It should be devoted to Fairmount Desert. We are models of great propriety and do not even know how to flirt. Which I got that the first time. Known for his impressionist canvases of Mount Desert Island, the Philadelphia painter Carroll Sargent Tyson had another side to his art, that tied to ornithology and the painting of avian portraits. In this respect, he followed in the footsteps of the Champlain Society group. The Snowy Owl was one of 20 original watercolors chosen from his magnus opus for a large print folio. Together with his nephew James Bond, they collaborated on a survey history titled Birds of Mount Desert Island, Acadia National Park, in 1941. The author, Ian Fleming, actually took the name of his British spy from the ornithologist, having come across it in one of the field guides on a visit to the West Indies. A little known fact. Southwest Harbor native Wendell Gilley started carving birds in 1956, and in a short 25-year second career became nationally known as, quote, a pioneer in the field of decorative bird carving. The museum celebrates his life and work with examples of his bird carvings by offering carving workshops and presenting special exhibits and educational programs. One of the highlights of the book Art of Katahdin was a chapter devoted to the Katahdin area paintings of Connecticut artist Charles Hubbard at Wright. Based on field trips to Mount Desert Island in 1922 to collect materials and make plein air drawings and oil sketches, the artist created several large dioramas of birds set into painted backdrops of familiar scenes along the coastline of the island. This one is titled Thunderhole. And they're at the Elsie Bates Museum. You should go and see them. They're beautiful. Seven years ago, Peter Rudolph exhibited the work of Harold Warren at the Clark Point Gallery in Southwest Harbor. That's his painting at left, lower left, and he's sitting at far left in the photo. In the middle is Scotty White, and on the right side of the photograph is Charles Kincaid. That's Charles Kincaid's oil painting of Sutton Island, and that is Scotty White's watercolor of Isford. Together with historian Rob Leith, they produced an exquisite catalog of Warren's work. In Art of Acadia, we attempt to round out the lives and works of the three Isford painters, Harold Warren, Scotty White, and Charles Kincaid, and present them both individually and as a group with a unique regional perspective from offshore at a time in American art when modernism was sweeping the art world. Among the watercolors by Warren that are in the book is a lovely study of Malign. That's how you pronounce it. After a momentous trip to Katahdin Lake in 1939 that inspired a series of mountain portraits, artist Marsden Hartley lived with a fishing family, the Youngs, in Korea on the Gouldsboro Peninsula. While there, the artist visited Scoodic Point, by then it was a part of Acadia National Park, and produced a group of turbulent storm paintings. He wrote to his niece that, quote, "I'm not a book of the month painter and do not paint pretty pictures, but when I'm no longer here, my name will register forever in the history of American art." And so that's something too. 20 years earlier, in 1922, the artist Carol Tyson invited artist John Marin at Wright to visit him on MDI. On a tour of the island by water, Marin took many quick watercolor sketches, capturing the simplest gestures of movement, some in just as small a time as 1 minute. One of the many serendipitous discoveries in our research for Art of Acadia were the lively watercolors of Frederick Hastings, among which was an unusual post-World War II ceremonial scene in Southwest Harbor. Historian and master boat builder Ralph Stanley recalls attending the event, which featured tributes by various dignitaries, including representatives of the War Department and the Navy. One of the draped signal flags denoted victory, while the highest flag above the American flag has an E for excellence. In this ship portrait at Wright of the side-wheeler J.T. Morse by multi-talented Northeast Harbor artist Gus Phillips, one can sense the pride and joy felt by boatmen and onlookers that would salute her as she passed along her route. In Joseph Allen's account of the steamer J.T. Morse, published in 1937 in the April Bulletin of the Society for the Preservation of New England Antiquities, Allen notes that, quote, Southwest Harbor was always one of the less sophisticated summer resorts, and its sardine canning factory and cold storage plant furnished much business for the Moores. He continues, in later days, a large sign on the wharf greeted passengers with the news that Southwest Harbor was a gateway to Acadia National Park. If you haven't read that account, if you're interested in the history of this boat, that account, just go online to the J.T. Morse history. It's one of the most wonderful stories. It's quite long. I think it's about 30 pages, but it's really worth a read. The Seattle, Washington-based company, Under the Boat, uses layers of Baltic birch, hand-colored and glued together to create their bathymetric relief charts of undersea floors, of which this is a detail of Mount Desert Island at left from the Osher Map Library in Portland. By contrast, at right, artist Elise Palmer uses her graphic skills and imagination to interpret the island as a seasonal flower garden. Her medium is digital printing.
So, David and I, in putting this book together, wanted to expand on the pioneering work of John Wilmerding and Pamela Belanger in their respective books, The Artist's Mount Desert and Inventing Acadia. In addition to the three Islesford painters, we decided to feature the distinguished group of artists that came to Great Cranberry Island after World War II, led by painter, printmaker, and poet Charles Wadsworth and his wife, writer and artist Jean Howard, who arrived in 1946. Wadsworth often drew on his surroundings for his art, inspired by a variety of island motifs, including the Beal and Bunker boat shed, which was once a working lobster dock. In this painting, The Fish Pier, from 1955, the central figure looks out toward the Mount Desert Island hills, which serve as the backdrop for many Cranberry Isles paintings. Wadsworth was instrumental in bringing painters John Helliker and Robert Lahoughton to Great Cranberry. In 1954, the pair purchased a 19th century house and boatyard built by Captain Enoch Stanley. The boat sheds and outbuildings were converted to studios where Helliker and Lahoughton worked every summer on breaks from their teaching jobs in New York City. On the left is John Helliker's The Boat Ride, 1979, and on the right, Robert Lahoughton's The Lawn Party, 1991. At their death, their property on Great Cranberry Island became an artist in residency. The Helliker-Lahoughton Foundation celebrated the 20th anniversary of its founding in 2014. To date, the foundation has hosted more than 100 artists, several of whom are featured in Art of Acadia. Our Uncle Bill, the painter William Kingbush, traveled from his home in New York City to Maine every summer and did some of his most important work while in residence on Great Cranberry. He once said, "When I arrive in Maine, I start seeing again." He practiced an abstract expressionism based on the landscape, and he was a lover of Maine islands. This is his island, Frenchman's Bay, 1975. The renowned photographer Ansel Adams chose a predominantly ocean view from Schoodic to represent Acadia National Park in his National Parks portfolio, shot in 1949. Rather than including the immense pink granite headland and deep green conifers, Adams brought his camera and tripod down to the water's edge to focus on what he called an even more ancient Atlantic surge. Also at Schoodic, during his remarkable 42-year tenure as impresario of art at the University of Maine, Vincent Hartkin would retreat from time to time to Schoodic. His wife Frances would drive him down from Orono. There he would make these intricate drawings of elements of the landscape, or, channeling Marsden Hartley, paint watercolors of waves crashing on granite ledges, and he would recharge. This is his Schoodic Point Gnarled Juniper, 1992. Nearly a third of Art of Acadia is dedicated to artists currently working on and around Mount Desert Island, more than 90. Had David and I had our druthers, we would have made it 190. The process of elimination was painful, especially where we had personally solicited work from an artist. Sarah Faragher was born on Mount Desert Island and spent her early childhood there before moving away. The place is imprinted on me as a standard of beauty, she has written. Faragher has found inspiration on Schoodic, whose bedrock, she feels, quote, corresponds with the home I build for myself when I paint, the ephemeral, spiritual home that goes where I go, and yet at the same time feels like that bedrock, so firmly underfoot. This is Sarah Faragher's Moonlight at Schoodic, Maine, 2012. Speaking of bedrock, the legacy of stone cutting on Mount Desert Island is most visible in Hall Quarry on the western shore of Somme Sound. The Colorado-based painter Joellen Dewsbury discovered this spot in 1971 and was drawn to the plains of cut stone set among the spruce, like the ruins of an ancient culture. In a 2010 interview, Dewsbury said, "Places will settle in my imagination as if they were people or acquaintances whom I want to revisit." David and I are sad to report that Jolie Dewsbury passed away on August 7th, just a week ago, last Sunday, after a fight with pancreatic cancer. She worked in the MDI region for really a half a century, almost every summer, and she lived to paint. This is her quarry in Somme Sound, Maine, Mount Desert, from 2000. The master realist painter Richard Estis began dividing his time between New York City and Maine when he purchased the former residence of the aforementioned painter Carol Tyson from his dealer, Alan Stone, in the 1970s. Since then, Estes has painted a number of Mount Desert views, including this patch of thick woods in Acadia. In some ways, this tangle of trees offers a challenge similar to the urban views for which Estes is best known. This is Richard's Acadia Park, number 2, 2006. Janice Anthony, on the left, who lives in Jackson, Maine, has always sought to represent a nature unmarred by human impact, whether she's painting in Acadia or inland. About this painting, she wrote, "I found this tiny reflective pool on the summit of Cadillac Mountain. As I am always looking at the alpine plants that grow at high levels, as well as at the breathtaking views, the clear air and the view of the sea from the mountain are iconic, but the small world at my feet was a microcosmic world with its own life." This is her rock pool, Acadia, 2003. And on the right, Vernal's song by Soamesville painter Scott Waltz was inspired, in his words, by the echoes of spring as the wood frogs begin emerging from the vernal pools and new green growth tips the evergreens. He adds, "What speaks to me about Acadia is the intimacy of the park, the sense, the ease of accessibility from mountaintops, lakes, forests, and seaside." This is his Vernal song, 2012. "A trail," wrote Ken Olson, former president of Friends of Acadia, "is both a literal connection between humans and nature and a symbolic pathway into the creation." With a background in architecture, Bar Harbor artist Liddy Hubble on the left traded her drafting tools for a paintbrush in the 1990s. In recent years, she returned to the fine line work of her earlier profession in order to record sections of some of her favorite trails in Acadia. Her pen and brush drawings, I should say, celebrate the skill and technique that go into the engineering that is at once beautiful, enduring, clever, and simple. This is her Perpendicular Trail, number 2, 2013, ink with dip pen and Sumi brush. And on the right, many of Acadia's trails are marked by cairns, those modest arrangements of stones meant to guide the hiker. Artist Diana Roper McDowell's stylized and constructivist watercolor View from Norumbega incorporates a classic Bates cairn designed by Waldron Bates, a Boston attorney, outdoorsman, and fisherman who became the father of Acadia's trail systems. In recent decades, an increasing number of artists have chosen to settle year-round on Mount Desert Island, drawn to the quality of life but also to an exceptional assortment of winter motifs. What was once a true rarity, a view of Acadia that featured snow, is now more common and has led to a four-season palette. Amy Polian, on the left, moved to Town Hill with her husband and fellow painter, Robert Polian, in 1994. They had both attended the Philadelphia College of Art. In her image of the Peggy Rockefeller farm on the Crooked Road in Bar Harbor, Polian captured an early episode of mud season. Polian offers these thoughts about what it's like to paint in March. Early spring is a wonderful time to be out painting on Mount Desert Island. There might be ice underfoot, and even the warmest March day is chilled by a steady breeze across the last snowdrifts. But cold and wet can be overcome with wool sweaters and bean boots. Robert Polian, on the right, prefers the off-season for painting on-site, seeking out, as it were, the bones of winter, whether it be a mountainside etched with snow or this blowdown on Little Long Pond. Robert Polian was the first Acadia National Park artist in residence, taking a turn in October 1993. This is his winter Little Long Pond 2015. David and I wanted to represent an array of mediums in Art of Acadia, and I wanted to give you just a couple of examples. Granite is the principal medium of the artists who have taken part in the Schoodic International Sculpture Symposium, which started in 2007. Over the course of 5 symposia, sculptors from around the world and Maine worked with stone cut from down east quarries, creating and citing sculpture across the region. Don Justin Meserve from Round Pond, Maine, took part in the first symposium. His piece, this piece, Cleat, is installed just offshore in Winter Harbor. This is Cleat 2007, made from Jonesboro granite. At his death in 2010, Meserve bequeathed 56 stone sculptures to the Schoodic International Sculpture Symposium to be sold to promote art education in Maine. Sale of the work benefits the symposium, the Maine Stoneworkers Guild education program, and Schoodic Arts for All, a wonderful legacy. Dan Fernald, a lobsterman, and his wife Katie, a high school math teacher, opened the Islesford Artist Gallery on Little Cranberry Island in 1986. The Fernalds set out to share the art of the community with island residents and visitors with a parallel mission to encourage everyone to try their hand at making art. Art of Acadia features this remarkable husband and wife duet, as it were. Dan's colorful pastel of lobster buoys bobbing in the wake of a boat at left, and Katie Fernald's wool and linen wall piece based on that painting from 2009, and the hook rug is from 2012. I'm going to turn it back over to David as we near the end of this presentation.
Thank you. The flower basket at left is a collaboration between Passamaquoddy master basket maker Molly Neptune Parker and her grandson George. The materials are brown ash, sweetgrass, and dye. In addition to her many talents and virtues as basket maker and foster parent, Molly was a founding member and past president of the Maine Indian Basket Makers Alliance, and also was a National Endowment for the Arts Heritage Fellow. George serves as museum educator at the Abbey Museum, where he seeks to educate the public about Wabanaki culture through developing new programs and exhibition content, giving tours, and doing research. The etched owl at right was made by gifted Passamaquoddy artist David Moses Bridges. The artist carries on the ancient tradition of depicting design motifs in birch bark. Bridges is also a master builder of the traditional Passamaquoddy birch bark canoes. Korea, Maine resident Rosemary Levin is a master rug hooking artist, challenged by a project to design and hook 17 rugs, one for each of the bridges in the park. When completed, she donates her work to the annual benefit auction of Friends of Acadia. She works from on-site photos and drawings and blends the dyes to create the special color scheme. For inspiration, Rosemary can go online, as I did, to the historic American engineering record created in 1996 by historian Richard Quinn. Here she would find a wonderful 13-page report on the creation of the Eagle Lake Bridge.
So, in the afterword for our book, David and I provide some thoughts on the current status of Acadia National Park. And we just wanted to read the final two paragraphs. For all its challenges, the park inspires optimism. Whether you are witnessing the first sunrise on the eastern seaboard or being sworn in as a new citizen of the United States at a ceremony at the Jordan Pond House. We who love this island, historian Samuel Eliot Morison famously wrote, say that it can never be ruined while the tide ebbs and flows twice a day and an offshore wind turns the sea to an incredible blue, or the east wind brings wreaths of fog that clothe the coasts and hills in a soft white. This island, he predicted, can never be ruined while the Acadia National Park keeps up trails.
Mount Desert, Morison concluded, is not merely an island. It is a way of life to which one becomes addicted. And if we are permitted in the hereafter to enter the abode where the just are made perfect, let us hope that it may have some resemblance to Champlain's Ile des Monts Déserts, and we might add to the visions of its many artists. Thank you.
Sure. We were given our marching orders from Bonnie to make this a half-an-hour talk so that there would be time for people to ask questions. Sure.
I wonder if there's any justification for this notion that throughout the year or parts of the year there are the light on Mount Desert Island is special or peculiar in some way.
It's a great question. I mean, I think light is very important to paint, to the artists. I'm thinking of a line from a poem by Rosanna Warren that she wrote about our uncle. And she said that light in a main room can cut a hand, or something like that. It's sort of that how strong it is, the raking light. And certainly we've tried to represent some of those elements of light in the work in the book. David, as a painter,
Yeah, light is so important. I mean, I love painting in the rain, I love painting in the fog, I love painting on beautiful days. I think that the area of Mount Desert Island lends itself to sort of beautiful events when you're painting, primarily because of its relationship to the ocean and the salt and the spray that comes up in the air that's the water that's in the atmosphere. I paint all along the coast, or used to, before I started writing. So I can't really say that there's any difference. Just perhaps that, and most of the paintings that I've done have been from Cranberry Island, so it's a very different thing to look back at the mainland and see the mountains from a distance.
Other questions?
So with a landscape and a vision that endures so much the way Mount Desert Island does, looking to the future, what excites you about some of the new things you're seeing? I mean, how are people bringing new to this enduring landscape? What's exciting you about some of the new artists or some of the new interpretations of this place going forward?
Well, I think you've seen some of those exciting new avenues this evening. I'm thinking specifically of the winter paintings, which were really indeed a rarity. I mean, in our uncle's day, you came up here for the summer, you did your work, you had these. We inherited some of the packing crates, put them in the packing crates, sent them back to Crouchard Galleries in New York, and that was it. And in some ways, they rarely showed their work in Maine. That's changed entirely. I mean, I think most artists now do work here, and many of them show their work. I remember when I was at College of the Atlantic, we dreamt about having a show of Frederick Church's oil sketches of NDI, which had never been shown here in the place where they were made, and how cool that would be. It didn't happen. It's still a fantasy. But David, any thoughts on the?
I think it's hard to add to what you said. I just think that there's so many different kinds of art. The book is a good example of a sampling. We had so many things that we looked at that were so interesting, and we had really hard choices in cutting it down because the book at one point was just way too big, and we had to take out some of the artwork. But it's hard to say that there's, to me, it's all exciting. I'm as excited by the stamp that Roosevelt gave his okay on for Acadia as I am in the contemporary painting of today. I mean, to me, that's all things Acadia are just fascinating, and I started to collect things, so I've got postcards and books that I've collected, and even some objects that I've bought. So I'm very excited by, in some ways, learning about the region through collecting and through research. And when I see someone's artwork, it's either someone that I know or don't know, and if I do know, it's nice to see a progression.
Yeah, and actually also I just wanted to do a little shout out to the BioLab. Certainly these exhibitions, and I'm thinking specifically of some of the collaborations that artists have done with scientists. I mean, that's really new, great work. I mean, there's so many exciting things in this exhibition. The current one, you wander around and there are artists that I've never heard of before, and some that I have, and I just love that, the revelation that goes along with that, with those kind of shows. Sure. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I think there's a great responsibility in recognizing how our environment is faded, in what it used to be, in how it's degraded, in foreseeing the future, how to repair our environment and make it as healthy and functional as it once was.
I think that's a really important issue, and I think that every time someone does a painting, a landscape painting, it's capturing something in time, and it almost becomes a documentation of a place that may change, I mean, because of a variety of reasons. But I have to say that I climbed Acadia yesterday. It's one of my favorite climbs, and looking down from the top, even on an incredibly hot, humid day, about 5 o'clock in the evening, there was just this sense of the landscape and those pitch pines and just the sensuous, the surroundings, and I think it makes you even more determined to preserve those places and to preserve our island. I don't know if that answers the question, but
Yeah, pretty much.
okay.
Thank you.
David, do you want to?
I could answer it a different way, which is that when particularly in the Katahdin region, but also here, when I would go out and paint, you set up your easel, you look for a subject you really want to paint, and that takes time, it takes effort, but when you find it and you think you've got it, you set up your easel and you start in. And a couple of hours later, you're absolutely visually drunk, and everywhere you turn, it's gorgeous. It is so beautiful. And something says you want to come back and do it again. So the next year, you plan your trip around that motif and others that you found. That leads to a love of that spot, and I think in some ways, a fostering of wanting to make that, to keep that place as beautiful as you see it every year. And I mean, that's part of, I think, what you're talking about a little bit, that, I mean, things have changed. When I painted on Long Island back in the day, way back, I painted a scene off Scuttle Hole Road, which 5 years later was a housing development. It's gone, period. And my painting is a piece of history.
That's what I was trying to get at. Sure.
Based on your presentation today, photography represents a very small portion of the book. That might not be true of the book, but is that true of the book? And didn't you make a conscious choice in terms of the balance between photography and painting, etc.? And why?
I think that in terms of photography, we did this with the Katahdin book too. We tried to focus on mostly paintings, drawings, engravings, different kinds of artwork, and not so much color photography. We included a few, and I think there's one photograph, or maybe there's more than one, in the Acadia book. But we did it on purpose, because in a way, a photography book is really another project. It's just so big. There are so many thousands of beautiful photographs. It would be very difficult to make a hard selection and present them in a way that has a lot of contrast, that really makes it exciting to read. But I do think it would be a great project to try doing. I've also thought about doing a book on postcards, because those are photographic. And I've been studying a little bit about the history of the postcards and the companies that made them and how they were made. And then you have the notes on the back, and you can tell what year it was made by the postmark, and you can really get into it. And it is a beauty of its own. The trend. I mean, now today we have in one of our talks we have a beautiful dye transfer print of Elliott Porter that's in the book, just stunning. And I mean, he represents kind of an apex of color photography, I think. I don't know that much about color photography, but he really worked at it, and he even made his own dyes so that when he printed in his Santa Fe studio, he could really get what he wanted in color. The same way that someone like Ansel Adams or Edward Weston worked a lot on making their image exactly the way they wanted it. It wasn't the first shot that they took. They oftentimes played with them to change them, to manipulate them and interpret the landscape, make it stronger.
And to segue from that, one of the more unusual pieces in the book is a collaboration between Peter Ralston, who's a well-known photographer for the Island Institute, and Eric Hopkins, who's one of our great landscape painters. And they chose, this is for a benefit that they did, I think, for Maine Media workshops. They did, Peter had a painting, a photograph, and then Eric put his signature trees on it and turned it into it. It's quite a piece. It's quite fun. So it's actually a great guy. Sure.
I'm just curious, both Carl and David, you are most likely very familiar with a lot of the art that's featured in your book. Was there anything new that you learned through this process that you didn't know that you're curious to share with us? A lot, okay.
Yeah.
Not about the process.
Like everything.
Yeah.
It was a total learning curve for me, not for Carl, because he's lived up here and he knows a lot more about the contemporary, but for the 19th century, it was a total learning curve.
Yeah, I mean, there were just a lot of revelations. And I always like it when we're able to uncover someone or give someone, an artist, some attention who hasn't had the attention that we think they deserve. And I'm thinking specifically of a wonderful Russian-born artist named Lev Goryansky. I wrote about his work a number of years ago, and at one point he did a wonderful series of fog paintings, one of which is in the book, and it's the foggiest fog painting you've ever seen. I mean, we get a lot of personal pleasure from finding these things and highlighting them. Yep.
You mentioned some of the artists were here. I wondered if we could acknowledge them, or they could stand or something, and we could clap.
Sure. Diana Ansley is there, and Alex King.
Budgetary pressures in public schooling are such that arts music are being reduced. Is the arts community doing anything to replicate that service so that we have young artists coming up?
We're the ones to answer that.
That one just went right. No.
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, could you repeat the question louder?
Sure. Budgetary pressures for public schooling are such that a lot of the arts and music programs are being reduced dramatically. I was curious to know if the arts community itself is stepping in to replicate some of those services so that we have young artists coming up in the future.
Well, I would say yes. And certainly, I'm just drawing on my knowledge of Maine. There's the Maine Alliance for Arts Education, which does a lot of work lobbying, trying to get there. And then the famous STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math is now STEAM. science, technology, engineering, art, and math. Sorry, I worked that one out in my head. But I think more and more, I mean, I work for the Maine Community Foundation. I think more and more private philanthropy is filling in the gaps that are arising. And arts, you know, unfortunately, traditionally has been sort of the one that's been pushed to the side when they're making their plans for the year. You know, we have to have math, we have to have this, we don't necessarily have to have art, which is a really unfortunate way to look at things. But no, I think that there are efforts underway. But yeah, it's an upward climb, I think.
When I was in school at Lawrenceville, there was not a course in painting, so it wasn't until much later that I became interested in painting. So it is possible that people coming up that don't have these programs find them and find their muse later.
I just wanted to add to that recently I went to a presentation by a local group called Island Readers and Writers, or Writers and Readers. And there's a local artist, Rebecca Ray, who goes to the schools on various islands and does art projects.
She's also in the show.
Beautiful example of
I would also add that Mount Desert Elementary School devotes an entire week to art in the spring.
and just connected to that, one of my favorite paintings in the book, you know, when I first moved to Soamesville, I lived above the bridge, which is, you know, and we moved there in the winter, so we had the illusion this was our bridge. You know. And then later discovered it was the most photographed, probably the most photographed landmark on the island. But anyway, Carol Shutt and Dan Fernald worked with a group of 8th graders on a mural for the school of the Soamesville Bridge in the winter. And it's an amazing painting. You'll see it in the book. Yeah, they have a good program. Carol Shutt. She's in the book too.
You started it off with the staff, was it? That was done by an 8th grader. You started
Yes, and that's another way of working that partnership between the park and the local schools. Yeah, there's a lot of good stuff. A lot of good stuff going on this island. We would be glad to sign some books for you if you're interested. They're right over there. Thank you for coming.